out, any of you who are in the back, we're going to be displaying things on the screen. So if you're not in a place where you can easily see, why don't you come on where you can.
Well, welcome everyone to the first workshop on doctoral proposals, and we have decided, as you can see in front of you, to use a panel approach for this presentation, and so each of us throughout the afternoon will be chiming in as appropriate to bring up our insights as we go through each of these separate areas. Also, I'd like to welcome those of you out there at your computer screens who are watching this over the net. We hope that if you have some pressing questions and want to forward those to us, you'll do that, and we'll attempt to get to as many of those questions as we can. So welcome to you as well. One of the reasons that we decided that this workshop was a good idea is because several things have changed recently. And I'll mention some of those, but you'll notice as we go through several of the sections in the different areas of the agenda, we'll be talking about some of those new areas too. One of the changes that has occurred for about 4 or 5 months now is that for all of the site visits, we now use 3 consultants. Before that time, we had used 2. So now there's an additional 3rd consultant that goes on all the site visits. Another change that occurred at our last coordinating board meeting, and this again is new, is that we are now going to require for all newly approved doctoral programs 5 years of annual reports on the progress of the doctoral program in aligning with the proposal that was submitted and approved. We have gone from a one-time 3-year report to now 5 years of annual reports. Another new change is that the preliminary authority has been expanded for doctoral programs. We have added 8 new criteria to the 4 that already existed, and I will be going through all 12 of those a little bit later. But for doctoral programs, the standard is higher, and we look for more information than for bachelor's and master's programs. For those of you who are familiar with the doctoral report, one of the basic reasons is doctoral educations are a lot more expensive, cost a lot more money, take a lot more time. So because of that, we want to have more criteria that we use before preliminary authority is granted. Another change is that whenever we get a proposal, a doctoral proposal, really any proposal, but whenever we get a proposal in that has a severe deficiency or critical problem with it, we are going to be sending those proposals back to the institution for redo. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to go through preliminary authority again. That still resides with the institution. However, the proposal needs to come up to the standards that we need to see before we spend a lot of time with it. And so critical flaws will cause proposals to be sent back to the institution for redo. Our last new event, and these are just highlights, so they're more than the ones I'm mentioning, but the last one is we formed the Graduate Education Advisory Committee to implement the recommendations from the doctoral report. That's a statewide committee, and they have recommended 18 characteristics or data about new doctoral programs that are going to be displayed on institutional websites and the coordinating board website. So by program, not by institution, but by program, we're going to be looking at things like time to degree, student publications, faculty publications, so forth. So there are 18 of those that we're going to be looking at and will be needed from doctoral programs. So those are some of the new areas that caused us to want to spend some time with you in laying out what's required for doctoral proposals. Here on the panel, we have 4 people who've been heavily involved in reviewing doctoral programs. Catherine Parsoneau, myself, you can see Roger Alford, our Assistant Commissioner, Joe Stafford, and another Program Director, Kevin Lemoyne. So we're the panel, and we're the ones that are going to be talking to you today about these issues. If there is a hot and burning question that just can't wait, we're happy to get to that, but we're going to spend a lot of time at the end of the meeting answering your questions, and those who email them in, we're going to have a live microphone, so not only can we hear in this room what you're saying, but it'll also be transmitted to those out there that are watching on the web. Okay. Catherine, you have the stage.
Well, you all picked up, I believe, several handouts when you came in the door and signed your name on our attendance list. One of those is a handy little list of links, and these are links to a number of the documents to which we will all be referring throughout the afternoon. You have another handout titled Statutory Authority for the Coordinating Board to Review and Approve New Degree Programs. Every once in a while somebody calls me up and says, why do you get to do this stuff? How did you guys draw the black bean to do this, and do you really have to? Well, most of you know that this agency was founded or begun by the legislature, by the Texas legislature. So we have legislative mandate to provide state-level oversight and coordination of higher education. And part of the law that enables the coordinating board to exist tells us that we have the authority to approve any new degree or certificate programs throughout the state. No publicly funded institution can begin a new degree program or certificate program without our approval. That's what the law says. Then to implement that law, we pass agency rules. All state agencies that are empowered to pass rules collectively make up what's called the Texas Administrative Code, and that's what implements the Texas statutes, in our case the Texas Education Code. So we have several places in our rules that address degree proposal and degree authority matters. And what I did on this handout was simply to provide for you the main statutory references, so you can see where in the law we are empowered to do the things we do. Now, the law leaves it up to us how we figure out a procedure for doing that, and those nuts and bolts decisions are not always even enshrined in our rules, because rules, if you want to change a procedure, the rule has to be changed. So frequently the rules will outline the playing field a little more clearly, but then we, for ourselves, come up with the procedures that make things happen. Sometimes when we revise our procedures, we have to change the rules, but sometimes not. One of the questions I receive the most frequently when I'm emailed or called up on the phone by any of you is this proposal a substantive or a non-substantive proposal? Y'all remember those terms. A memo went out earlier this year from Cal Callison saying, these are archaic terms. These are no longer in general use. They're from the old dictionary. Back before 2000, the board itself heard requests for degree programs at all levels, from bachelor's through doctoral programs. And around the time that Closing the Gaps the higher education plan was created, the board took a good long look at what it did with its meeting time and decided that maybe it had other functions that would be more valuable to higher education around the state than to approve all degrees with a hearing at a quarterly board meeting. Up until that time, the commissioner had had a very limited authority to approve degrees of very specific types. During the past 6 years, the authority to approve degree programs has moved more to the commissioner and the commissioner's staff. So now the only degree programs that must be taken to the board are doctoral level programs. Okay? There are some circumstances where other degree programs could be taken to the board, but it's not usual anymore. Substantive proposals used to be those that had to be taken to the board, bachelor's, master's, or doctoral. And non-substantive were those where, for example, if you were offering a Bachelor of Arts in French, in Spanish, and Italian, and you wanted to offer German and had the faculty and there was no new cost, then that was non-substantive. We're not using those terms anymore. We didn't have to change the rules in order to make that change. That was a procedural change. Any of the rules that affect our authority to approve doctoral programs can be found in Chapter 5, Subchapter C. Roger's going to talk about Subchapter B in a minute, which has to do with the preliminary authority. But when we talk about criteria for new doctoral programs in our rules, Section 5.46, that's Chapter 5, Subchapter C, and the section is 5.46. That's where you will look to find the criteria that all new doctoral programs must meet. I think that's about all I had on that. We just wanted to make sure you knew the pointers to where you could find this information.
Yeah, I might just add one thing to that. I appreciate Catherine's preparation of this and getting this on the table at the beginning. If it's in the law, we can't change it. Neither can the board. If it's in the rules but not in the law, the board can change it but may not. If it's in neither, if it's not in the law, not in the rules, but in our procedures, we'll be much more inclined to listen to you. But if you can make it work within the framework of the law, the rules, and the procedures, we can probably expedite your request a lot more. So. Thank you.
All right. Let's talk about something that's unique to a lot of people, and that's table of programs. All universities and health-related institutions in Texas have a table of programs. This is basically a table of all the degree programs that the institution has the authority to offer. There are two basic types of authority, and you've got an illustration of that over there from Lamar University. You'll see some numbers in there. Where you see a 1, that means that the institution has broad authority at that level, that is bachelor's, master's, doctorate, or professional, and within that 2-digit zip code. So, for example, if you had 2 or 3 engineering programs at the bachelor's level and broad authority at that level, you could add an additional engineering program and have the authority to do that once you created a proposal and sent it to us for review. The 2 means that you have preliminary authority, and I'll talk about that momentarily, but you don't have any programs yet. Preliminary authority, as I'll describe, is kind of a green light from the coordinating board that you can go ahead and start preparing. The reason that we decided to use preliminary authority was particularly for doctoral programs. there's a lot of investment that an institution has to make before they can get approval for a doctoral program. We wanted to send a clear and strong signal to institutions that we felt they were ready to do that. And so that's preliminary authority. Then you're not guaranteed approval of your proposal, but you are guaranteed that you can prepare one. The 3 that you see up there means limited authority. And if you scroll down to some of the footnotes, you'll see that this has to do with 6-digit zip code degree programs. So wherever there's a 3, there's also a letter associated with it and a footnote that says what specific degree programs the institution is authorized to deliver. So that's a table of programs. This table of programs, along with the mission statement, is reviewed every 4 years for all institutions, health-related institutions and general academic institutions. At that 4-year mark, we send a list of low-performing programs to the institution, including doctoral programs, that doesn't meet our very minimal standard for graduates, number of graduates. What is that, 3, 6, and 12, I think, something like that? Maybe I'm off a little bit.
9 maybe, 3, 6, and 9.
3, 6, and 9, 3 doctoral graduates in 3 years, 6 masters in 3, and 9 in bachelor's degrees in 3 years. So it's a fairly low threshold for productivity, but if you don't meet that, then you have to respond to the letter from Joe's office and say why you're not meeting it and why you should retain that degree program. So we want you to have degree programs, but they need to be productive. They need to produce graduates. And every 4 years we look at that. Occasionally, in addition to the 4-year review, we find that an institution wants to make a minor request in the zip code, and we're able to do that at the staff level. If there's a minor change at the 5 or 6-digit level in a zip code, we'll entertain that outside of the 4-year window. In addition, if there's a sufficient case made outside of that 4-year time period for preliminary authority, we will review that. Some institutions, and this has happened just recently, get a lot of money from benefactors. That's associated with degree programs. Well, clearly, if you have several $1 million that are given to you that's associated with a degree program, we're going to be receptive to looking at offering or giving you preliminary authority if the justification is there. So outside the 4-year, we do have some flexibility in looking at preliminary authority. If you are requesting preliminary authority and a change in your mission statement, those are big deals to the coordinating board. Because of that, outside of the technical adjustments that I just mentioned at the 5 or 6-digit zip code area, because of that, the requests for preliminary authority and mission change have to go to the board. And so when you think about that, and it needs to go to the board, and we have several that are going to the board in January, you need to remember that that can only be approved every quarter, since the coordinating board only meets every quarter. Okay.
Roger, if I could just jump in there for just a second. While it's on a 4-year cycle, and as Roger's pointed out, we can take exceptions to that. Let me just give you a little caution about why you don't want to ask for exceptions very often. And that is when the board sees that you've popped up on their radar screen frequently, it's clear evidence that you're not planning ahead. So you don't really want a reputation of not planning ahead with us at the staff, but especially at the board level. On the other hand, when things have happened that really change the playing field, like the big gift that Roger mentioned, then that's a clear rationale for you've got a plan, but the plan didn't anticipate something, a change needs to be made. So we'll try to work with you and be flexible on it. but I want to, at the same time, advise you not to take advantage of that flexibility because it will hurt you.
Go ahead.
I'd say something else. I tend to, come along and put in overly simplistic statements sometimes, but I know there are a lot of faculty in the room who may not have encountered the concept of a table of programs before. There are 3 different levels of detail in which we here at the agency indulge in order to figure out just exactly what is the extent of program authority for each institution around the state. The top level snapshot on one page is this table of programs that we've just shown you. And with any institution in the state, we can essentially look at one page and see where you have active degree programs and at which levels. And in those areas, do you have a full authority to plan in that SIP category, or do you have only a limited category or a limited capability to plan? We can also see where you have the approval to plan through preliminary authority, but no active degree programs. I want to point out that while there are 54 federal SIP categories in their taxonomy. SIP, for those of you who are faculty and may not know, stands for Classification of Instructional Programs. It's a federal taxonomy, and anything that can possibly be instructed is accounted for in this grand scheme. You will notice that not all numbers 1 through 54 are represented up here. That's because only some of the areas are approved for funding through our funding structure. So, for example, if your institution is interested in offering an MFA in art, you want to make sure that you ask for that authority under SIP Category 50, which is Visual and Performing Arts, and is funded through our system, rather than Category 36, which is Leisure and Recreational Studies, Continuing Ed kinds of things, where there is also a category for art, but if you ask for the program there, you're never going to get a dime of funding. So at the top level, this is a very handy way to see what the extent of authority for your institution is. Beyond this, we get into more detail. We here keep an inventory of every degree program which is approved at each institution, and we also have lists of the courses that you've taught within the last 3 years. So we go from top level to very detailed.
And I know if you're at the faculty level, you say, well, what in the world has all of that got to do with anything worthwhile? And from your perspective, it doesn't, but from the state legislature perspective of managing this multi-billion-dollar enterprise, they want to know what's going on, and we need a taxonomy. We need a way to make sense of it all across all institutions. So bear with us. It is a procedure that's useful to them, even if it's not useful to you, and they do provide the dollars.
Okay, let's move into preliminary authority, and for those of you who have access, this is Rule 5.24. And I'll go through each one of those, focusing on doctoral programs and the kinds of things we look for in a package that we would get when you don't yet offer a degree in whatever area you're planning on, but you think that you are ready to start planning for that. Preliminary authority. This used to be planning authority, but we found that that was misconstrued, and as I mentioned a little bit earlier, we wanted to send a clear signal to institutions that we thought they were ready to start investing in the resources necessary to offer a degree. So preliminary authority is now a bigger deal than planning authority used to be. Doctoral preliminary authority is the most extensive process and includes the 8 additional ones that you see listed there. And let's go ahead and walk through those 12 criteria necessary. I might mention at the front that we also expect when you offer a practice doctorate that you will acquire preliminary authority first as well. What's a practice doctorate. A practice doctorate is a doctoral degree that doesn't require a dissertation or doesn't require research that reaches a dissertation level. Some examples are Doctor of Physical Therapy, Doctor of Nursing Practice. What does the AUD stand for?
Doctor of Audiology.
Doctor of Audiology. Those are practice doctorates. They as well will require preliminary authority and will need to go through all 12 of these that I will mention, with an additional one that the Graduate Education Advisory Committee is considering. And preliminarily, they are thinking that if there is a national accrediting association related to the degree, then the institution has to submit a plan for acquiring that accreditation for the degree. So that would be an additional 13th one as we're numbering them. Okay, the very first criterion is a demonstrated need for the future program. This is a very difficult one to come up with because, in effect, you're projecting out 4+ years into the future. It's a little bit different than master's degrees program that you're going to be producing graduates within a couple of years or maybe even quicker. So you need to present evidence, documentation that there's going to be a need for graduates, doctoral graduates, in 4+ years. Using BLS projections or the Bureau of Labor Statistics projections for the occupation area is one way to do that, and they, for those of you who are familiar, go out now to 2014. So if there's an occupation area that's associated with the graduates from the degree program that you're going to be proposing, then that would be a helpful source. These same types of projections are made for Texas, and they're also made regionally for Texas by the Texas Workforce Commission. Now, another approach that's been used successfully is what I'll call proportionality. For example, if you know the proportion of business faculty that are going to be required in 5 years, and you know the retirement projections of those business faculty, then you can figure out the proportion that would be associated with your particular facet of business, let's say accounting, and use that proportionality, that is a projection, and the proportion that are accounting that will be required in Texas or nationally for your graduates. So sometimes that has been used successfully. Less useful, but still helpful to us, are current vacancies that you might find in the Chronicle of Higher Education, our discipline-specific associations, our local position openings. There are advertisements in large cities for doctoral graduates, and that can be useful in making those projections. We at times ask the institutions for URLs. If you're familiar with association-specific sites on the web that list these kind of openings, that's helpful to us. It's our responsibility as reviewers to independently verify what you're saying. So we need to make sure that we can come up with the same numbers that you're projecting out there a ways. But it's tough to do that because you're looking out quite a bit in the future. The second criterion is complementing other degree programs at the institution. That's a plus. Go ahead, Kevin.
I might add that oftentimes professional associations and organizations will produce reports on the current numbers of graduates, make projections about future graduates in a particular field, and future workforce need as well. And those are really helpful.
Yes. Second criterion is complementing other degree programs at the institution. Clearly, that's a plus. For instance, if you want to build an engineering program, having strong chemistry departments, strong physics programs, and strong mathematics departments would be a plus for supporting a program, a doctoral program in engineering. So complements from other programs are helpful. The third criterion is unnecessary duplication. This is less of an issue with doctoral programs because we view graduates as being in a national or even international marketplace. Thus, a strong student demand and high demand for graduates would lessen this particular criterion's importance for doctoral programs. But we look at it. You'll have to make the case, for example, if there are 3 doctoral programs in business in the Metroplex and you want to add a 4th one, you're going to have to make a case for that. The 4th criterion is a critical mass of students and faculty. These are important requisites. You need enough students so that the program can become self-supporting within 5 years. This is one of our guidelines that we look at, and it's incumbent upon you to show how that program within 5 years will be self-supporting. That probably means you're going to need to admit more than 1 to 2 students a year. Otherwise, you'll never have a self-supporting program. You need enough faculty so that students can be mentored through the dissertation process. Now, here's a rule of thumb, and we'll be giving several rules of thumb throughout this workshop. A rule of thumb is 3 students per faculty member. That is, the student that's first coming in needs to be mentored so he can be directed toward the research that's going to be involved in the dissertation. There's going to be a student that's going to be right in the middle of the dissertation and going through the actual research collection of data analysis and so forth and so on. And then the 3rd student is going to be closing toward the end of the dissertation. So as a rule of thumb, 3 students per faculty member, and that's a faculty member that's actively researching, is something that we use for comparison. The first in the second list, and the 5th one if you're counting, is a demonstrated need. This is covered under 1, but for doctoral programs, you can also speak to an unmet or unique approach. Obviously, if you're on the leading edge in some area of research and knowledge creation, there may not yet be a strong or even evidence of a need for graduates. I think we would accept in a proposal those kind of degrees if you can demonstrate how it's going to contribute to some new discipline. It's on the leading edge of science, or on the leading edge of technology. But it's a little more difficult if there's no demand for graduates to make this case, obviously. The second one in the bottom list, and number 6, is evidence that there are existing doctoral programs that cannot expand to absorb the projected students. There's no additional capacity. When you look at institutions that already have these programs, they can't expand. It would take another building or floor of a building or the same amount of equipment. This we see particularly in health-related disciplines where there's certain clinicals that confine the expansion capability. So we're looking at that kind of information, that there's no capacity out there already to absorb students that you're talking about admitting. The third, and number 7, overall, is appropriate to the institution's mission. That is, for example, general academic versus health science center. There are strong, self-sustaining bachelor's and master's degree programs in the same or related fields. The reason this is important is because if you're adding a doctoral program and you've already got a very strong bachelor and master degree program, the faculty are in place. There are a lot of library resources. If there is laboratory equipment, it's there. A lot of it is. So that is a boon to adding a doctoral degree program. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't start a doctoral program without a strong master's and bachelor's program. However, it's more difficult. As a matter of fact, one institution in Texas expanded downward. They started with a doctoral program, then went to a master's program, and then have just recently added a bachelor's program. So it's not just a one-way trip, but it's just more difficult. It's more difficult to do it that way. You don't have a lot of undergraduate students helping to pay for very expensive doctoral faculty.
And in addition to that, I'd just add that in some disciplines, they've actually education started at the graduate level and is now expanding downward at the undergraduate level. So that's a slight difference. Material science is one example.
Women's studies is another.
These disciplines started at the graduate level, and now there's a demand for them at the undergraduate level. Okay, where am I? Number 8? Yes, number 8, thanks. The program has potential to achieve state or national prominence based upon the resources. Mainly this is faculty. If you've got nationally prominent faculty, it's a lot easier to get national prominence for your program. It's one of the first places that's looked at. This is confirmed by the consultants, and you'll hear about the site visit later, but one of the things we ask the consultants in the site visit is, does the program have potential for national prominence? And they can tell us right away, well, you've got these nationally prominent scholars, they've won awards, and so the potential is there. We look for that kind of confirmation from the consultants, but if you've got the potential in the preliminary authority area and some of those resources on board, that strengthens your case.
Roger, I might just add there, another piece of strengthening that case is having a vacant position and a good startup package and a nationally competitive salary for that vacant position. In contrast, a vacant position that's doesn't have the startup package and is at your average or below current salary probably isn't very convincing that you're committed to that kind of national prominence.
Okay, the ninth is demonstrated current excellence of undergraduate and graduate programs at the institution. What we look at here basically is enrollment in the programs, degrees awarded, and awards obtained, national rankings, those kind of indicators for existing programs. Further, we want to know how the excellence in those existing programs is going to be maintained when the proposed program has been installed. Lastly, the existence of graduates and graduation rates should match or exceed those of peer institutions. So if you have a doctoral program or several doctoral programs already, the placement rates for those doctoral programs should be at or exceed those of peer institutions. Remember, I mentioned earlier that we're going to be having indicators that the GAC, or Graduate Education Advisory Committee, are going to require for all doctoral programs. This is one of the indicators that will be listed on the website. So you'll be able to look within Texas at some of these placement rates that we're looking for. Number 10, satisfactory placement rates for current doctoral programs when compared to those of peer institutions. I just spoke to that. That's number 10. Not only the graduate, master's, and undergraduate programs, but doctoral programs as well. Number 11, how the program would address closing the gaps. This is particularly relevant to the number of faculty needed to support large enrollment increases. If you've looked at closing the gaps, the document, there's a projection in there about how many faculty we're going to need if we meet closing the gaps. So that is a kind of thing that you could speak to by your graduates of your program. The last one is institutional resources necessary to develop and sustain a high-quality program. This is resources across the board. We're talking about things such as libraries, equipment, facilities, the faculty, the administration, graduate assistantships, travel, startup packages, and others. Okay, I've walked you through the 12 areas that we're looking for when you're just starting out on this path to offer a doctoral program. It's the kind of thing we want to review to ensure that you're on the right track, to create a proposal and invest in hiring folks, buying equipment, increasing your library holdings, or whatever, so that you're comfortable and we're comfortable that you're on the right path.
We are a little ahead of schedule, Roger.
Good.
So we have about 4 minutes for questions if anyone has any. I'd like to mention one thing related to undemonstrated need to sort of piggyback on what Roger said. We get more and more requests for doctoral programs with a niche focus, and we find that a niche program will enhance a strong proposal, but it's not the strongest argument that we can make to the commissioner or the coordinating board for developing a new doctoral program. It's a strong argument when you can make a case for the graduates will be competitive in the workforce. It's not a strong argument if other elements of the proposal, resources, for example, are not strong.
Okay. I don't see any questions. Oh, wait a minute. We'll have our runner bring the... No, I'm sorry. It's our able assistant.
Thank you. You gave the ratio for research degrees, but not for practice, for faculty to student, but not for practice doctorates. Is it the same or different?
I'm hesitant to give a ratio at the current time. We are just pursuing, looking at the differences between the research degree and the practice degree. We've got a lot of experience with a research degree, but quite honestly, several fields are now burgeoning into offering a doctorate where a master's used to be enough, or a bachelor's used to be enough. So we're kind of feeling our way along, and I'd be uncomfortable offering. One of the things we look at, however, is, for example, for the Doctor of Physical Therapy, we go and look at programs that are offered around the country and ones that are rated highly, and we look at those kind of ratios. So we get kind of a feel for it, but I'm not comfortable enough to give a rule of thumb.
Okay, but that's helpful that you're comparing to outside institutions. Okay, thank you.
Let me also piggyback on that to say, even though Roger gave you a rule of thumb on the dissertation mentoring, and we'll give you some other of those kinds of rules of thumb, that's sort of the way we take our first look at it. It's your obligation to document what you think should be. And those of you who are provosts out here, I think you understand that well. You have to deal with a broad range of disciplines and well beyond the ones that you were most familiar with earlier in your career. That's sort of the everyday life here, is we get a proposal that even though we've got some specialization within the staff, it's probably something a little bit new to us, and so that's why you've got to spend all the time you do in writing these things up. We'll look at them from what we know, but you know more about your discipline than anyone else, and we can't read your mind. We can only read your paper. Other questions?
Well, Roger just pointed the microphone at me, so I think we'll steam right along here. What Roger has just outlined for you are factors that we concern ourselves with at the point that your institution requests the preliminary authority, which means at that point you would be able then to prepare a request for the degree to be approved. Preliminary authority doesn't mean it's okay for you to start offering that degree. It means it's okay for you to start pulling your resources together so that you can make a request to us. It won't surprise you to learn in this era of increasing students, which is what we want, and stable or dwindling resources, that we're really taking, I think, a more careful look at the preliminary authority stage than we did at the old planning authority. We're asking you for more program-specific information. We used to, with the planning authority, negotiate an authority for sort of a direction the institution wanted to go. You'd like to do something in the area of communications, and you'll let us know what when we get the proposal. That's changed, and so now the preliminary authority speaks more to a more specific program area within those broader categories that we noted with the two-digit zip codes. It also won't surprise you that when you do complete a degree request, a proposal to offer a doctoral degree, and send it to us, we're going to be looking at a lot of the same kinds of criteria once the proposal reaches us. When we were developing our agenda, it occurred to us that we were really going to take you on a little hike through the foothills of the statutory authority, and then into the mountains of preliminary authority, and then through developing the proposal. So what I'm going to talk about now are things to consider on your campus as you are developing a proposal, because this is what we're going to be looking at when it comes to us. Those of you who are graduate deans or who are provosts, it's incumbent upon you to work with the faculty who have the preliminary or the primary responsibility on your campus to write the proposal. Faculty don't do this for a living, and they may not know exactly what it is they're going to be required to do when they say, sure, I'll write that proposal. You bet I will. So hold their hand. Give them the resources on your campus that they need to do a good job so that you don't have to stay up all night on a holiday rewriting it for them. Yeah, I heard some giggles out there. When you are developing a proposal, you're going to want to, if you're a faculty member, if you're in charge of writing the proposal, you're going to want to refer to those criteria for new doctoral programs that I mentioned earlier in our rules, section 5.46. And we do have a link for those, I think, on your links, and they're up on the screen now. Anybody with a web browser can get these and look at them, so this is not arcane. This is open to everybody. Again, you're not going to be surprised when I walk you through these to notice real similarities between what we look for at the preliminary authority stage. But we're going to try to drill down a little bit deeper. New doctoral programs need to meet all of these criteria. You don't select some and ignore others. And I think you'll also notice that a lot of these complement the institutional standards that SACS has established. We don't want to create a rock and hard place situation for you all. We want to move in concert with the institutional accreditors, the regional accreditors, and also with professional accreditors in whatever field you may be looking at for doctoral program expansion. The first thing that we look for, which we've called here design of the program, is really a sort of general affirmation of institutional support for this program. We want to approve quality programs, high quality programs. Quality is one thing, high quality is another. And the administration and faculty of the institution has to have an understanding of what that means in whatever the discipline is, and there has to be a commitment, and that commitment is demonstrated throughout the body of the proposal through support for faculty, as Joe mentioned, through competitive salary and benefit packages, through the provision of student support, graduate student support. I don't know how many site visits I've been on where we're on the tour and one of the consultants asks, where are the places where graduate students will have their offices? And we're taken into a supply room with 2 tables in the corner and say this is where the graduate students will hang out, and it's private because it has a door on it. That's not what we're looking for when we want a high quality program, okay? We want to be sure that resources will be available. The consultants may make recommendations. Responsiveness to these recommendations can demonstrate a real commitment on the part of the administration. If your president and your provost aren't behind you, this is going to go nowhere, right? Freedom of inquiry and expression. I suppose there should be some sort of disclaimer here. Within the law, doctoral programs must be characterized by complete freedom of inquiry and expression. That means your faculty is going to need to represent diversity of institutional and research specializations and viewpoints. Those narrow niche doctoral programs that Kevin referred to sometimes don't appear to have this kind of breadth that really fosters freedom of inquiry and freedom of expression, something that we work hard to secure here. And I think your faculty associations and the AAUP would be very much in agreement with that. Faculty senates like this one. Strong programs at the undergraduate and master's levels are the third criterion that we look at. What do strong programs encompass? Well, doctoral programs, as Roger noted, need to be built upon strong undergraduate and master's programs. Generally, when we look at resources, we don't just look at the money you're going to throw at a program, although that's always a really good thing. But we want to know that the faculty already on board creating the culture into which the doctoral program would arrive are of high quality, that it's a strong faculty. Faculty resources really matter to us, and you're going to hear that throughout the afternoon. Beyond that, the facilities, the research labs and research equipment matter. The library resources, access to not just general reference materials, but things that are really going to help students succeed with cutting-edge research. That comes from having faculty who are doing cutting-edge research. That comes from providing the resources they need. And that brings us to the fourth criterion, the need for the program. There should be a demonstrated and well-documented need for doctorally prepared professionals in the discipline, both in Texas and in the nation. Doctoral education isn't just a regional or statewide enterprise. Doctoral education is at least national in scope, and we're aware of that. So it's important for the proposal to present an analysis of national data. And Roger spoke to this. I want to underline it. The number of PhDs being produced annually and the number of professional openings for those graduates needs to show that there's an unfilled need, that your graduates would have some place to go and look for jobs. I want to also point out that need for the program is something we look at very carefully in the preliminary authority material. This is something that we're already going to have scrutinized. So our guideline to you is, if you have at your institution received preliminary authority within the past 4 years, then we're going to assume that you have already demonstrated need. If your preliminary authority predates that 4-year limit and you still haven't requested the program, then we're going to ask you to go ahead and reestablish a demonstration of that need.
And I'll add that this helps to address the issue that we're very aware of, that there's a lot of variation across institutions in terms of the different levels of authority that have already been authorized historically. Some institutions may have broad authority at the doctoral level in a particular 2-digit CIP code, whereas another institution might have 0 or limited authority.
In a way, this levels the playing field for institutions who are relatively new in the doctoral end of the business, but it also allows institutions that have had authority they haven't seen fit to use for proposing a doctoral program to bring that information up to date for us. Fifth on this list of resources would be, and we can all say it together, the faculty. We value faculty. We value high quality and well-prepared faculty, particularly for doctoral programs. There must be a strong core of doctoral faculty. And while we want to see, as Roger suggested, a rule of thumb, approximately 3 students in the program for 1 faculty member, that's not written in stone. But we would not view favorably a proposal for a doctoral program that doesn't have at least 4 or 5 core faculty currently engaged in productive research. They need to show that they are involved in their profession, that they are bringing the profession to your institution in a meaningful way that's going to inform what they do when they mentor students, whether they're entry level in the doctoral program, whether they're seeking candidacy, or whether they're completing their dissertations. These faculty need to come from a variety of academic backgrounds, and they need to have complementary specializations. Again, with a niche kind of doctorate proposal, this can be a little hard to demonstrate, but to show how that niche, that specialization, ties into the broader discipline, I think is always a really good thing. You need to have faculty who have had some experience directing doctoral dissertations. Not all of your core faculty has to have had experience, but you need to have senior faculty who are well experienced in the dissertation part of the program in order to be able to help those who haven't be able to make a contribution. And these core faculty members need to be on board. If you have 2 faculty and you give us a proposal that says in year 4, if we get the students, we'll hire 3 more faculty and they'll all be senior level, you can probably expect that that's not really going to fly very far, very fast with us. Some of my colleagues on the panel here may want to speak to that. But it can be very difficult to sort of walk the tightrope between getting your institution's buy-in for what you know can be a great program and wanting to show that it can be done economically, but at the same time wanting to ensure that you don't cut yourself off at the knees, that your program has the resources going in, that it has a chance of success.
I might just add a little bit to that, Catherine. The chicken and egg problem has been with us for a long time. How do you recruit the faculty you need for a doctoral program when you don't have a doctoral program? And that's one of the reasons that they have gone to the preliminary authority. So if we sign off on saying, yes, we acknowledge that there's a need, that's your green light to assemble a faculty. We don't expect that the full faculty for the program is necessarily going to be assembled, but if you can't go ahead and recruit that 4 or 5 and have a core in place at the time we're reviewing the proposal, then it's not likely that you're going to be able to get the full complement that you're going to need to make the program viable and sustainable in that 5th year. So that's what we're looking for. We're really looking for clear evidence that the program will stand on its own and work well at the end of that 5th year. And so again, and this is actually in our rules and procedures, the 4 or 5. And I'm going to throw out another rule of thumb now, and I know some of you are going to shoot me for this, but I look for 10 faculty members who are actively engaged in research and can mentor the students. The reason I look for 10 is, even though our rule says 4 or 5, is I don't think you're going to be able to make the economics of the program work with fewer than 10 in that 5th year. If you can, it's because you've got other ways of funding the program. You won't do it on formula, I think, or at least in most of the disciplines. Again, it's up to you to show that you can make it work, but it's at least a good rule of thumb, I think, going in to look for 10 active, engaged researchers who are prepared and qualified to mentor people through their dissertations.
I would just add that for the successful doctoral programs over the past year, that has been an average, 10, maybe a little bit more.
I'd add that, of course, it depends on the discipline. You might have some disciplines where you'll have very few students, medieval literature, for example, and you may not need 10 or 15 faculty members, but you'll have other disciplines where you'll have a lot of students, but it's very much in demand, computer science, for example, and you'll need more than 4 or 5 faculty. I'd also say that the faculty, you have to have a sufficient number of faculty to teach the courses required in the program on a regular basis, particularly if you have core courses that every new cohort of students has to take. Then you're going to have to offer those regularly, and you're going to have to offer regularly advanced courses for the advanced students to be able to progress in a timely fashion.
So while we're on the subject of faculty, and we're talking about strong faculty, how do we know a strong faculty member when we see one? Well, one of the things we look at, just like P&T committees, is productive research appropriately distributed to the field and appropriate to the degree type. For PhD programs grounded in research, we expect to see articles in peer-reviewed journals, and we don't have quotas for this, but 1 every 5 years isn't enough. Okay? And I think Roger and Kevin will have something to say about this in a moment. I think practice doctorates, the kinds of practice or clinical doctorates where there's not a dissertation, these faculty still need to be engaged in substantial research, and research that improves whatever the practice is. And that research needs to be getting out to the field, disseminated in an appropriate way. It's a little bit different from the PhD situation, but nevertheless, there really shouldn't be doctoral level proposals that are not demonstrating faculty vibrant and engaged in their disciplines, doing research and engaging their students in the discipline of research, and then making sure that that research gets to the field where it can be used. For faculty qualifications, we have in our rules, and these are our rules here, so they're part of the Texas Administrative Code. We want to be sure that degrees held by faculty have been issued by institutions in the U.S. that are accredited by agencies recognized by the board, or that for those faculty who hold their credentials from outside the U.S., that their degrees can be demonstrated to be equivalent to similar degrees issued in the U.S. by appropriately accredited institutions. And we have even gone so far as to name a credential, a foreign education credential evaluation entity. So you can look in the rules to look at that. I might also remind you that as of the last regular legislative session, it is now illegal in the state of Texas to use a fraudulent or substandard degree to seek employment or to apply for admission to a program of higher education. So it's important for you all to be checking the credentials of your faculty. I'll let that sink in for a minute. You've got these great faculty. You want to make sure that they are assigned appropriate workloads. So the next criterion addresses teaching loads of faculty. We all know about faculty who teach lower division courses and have a 4-5 or 5-5 load, or a 4-3 load. That's probably not appropriate for faculty whose time is mostly spent supporting doctoral level education. So the teaching loads of faculty should not exceed 2 or at the most 3 courses per term. When we were talking amongst ourselves preparing for this workshop, we talked about a 2-2 or a 2-3 load. And again, this is going to vary by discipline somewhat. It's going to vary by the amount of a faculty member's workload devoted to teaching and then devoted to sponsored or funded research. It's going to vary depending on the load they have of dissertation students, whether they're the primary dissertation advisor or serving on the committee. We also look to be sure that there are adequate funds for attendance and participation in professional meetings and other professional activities, travel to these meetings, and funding to support research, particularly in areas where external, extramural funding may not be as available. So these are all important, and in fact important enough that we put them in our rules. To have all these faculty, you'd like to think about the students who are going to be coming to take advantage of the program. We want to see in the proposal clear evidence that you will be able to pull together what we're calling a critical mass of superior students. Open admission to doctoral programs is not a good idea. You all know that. I don't mean to patronize. But admission standards and enrollment expectations should guarantee a critical mass of superior students. And you need to be sure, and I'm going to just read this from the rule, the program must not result in such a high ratio of doctoral students to faculty as to make individual guidance prohibitive. This is where I think Joe's words of wisdom really strike home. If you are going to amass a critical mass of superior students, you need to have the faculty resources to be able to mentor those students appropriately and make sure that they also have peer-to-peer interactions that are going to enhance their experience. Anybody want to jump in?
Done good.
All right. We are steaming along. You're going to get a break soon, trust me. We do concern ourselves with residency expectations, particularly for doctoral programs, and we are more concerned here probably than we are for bachelor's or master's programs again. We expect there to be some kind of a residency requirement, and yet we have written our rules with enough flexibility to be able to accommodate online and distance options for offering doctoral degree programs. We want to include electronic gathering places, but on-campus residency is an important part of a doctoral student's experience. So we want to be sure that institutions offering doctoral degrees need to be able to provide, first of all, significant, sustained, and regular interaction between faculty and students and among students themselves. Whether it's an undergraduate or a doctoral student, those peer-to-peer and faculty-to-student relationships really matter, and I know each one of you can think about your own experience to affirm that. There need to be opportunities to gain access and engage in depth a wide variety of educational resources related to the degree program and fields associated to the degree program. Not all research can be done online. Not all research should be done online. Opportunities for significant exchange of knowledge with the academic community. And that's the larger academic community. Yes, the community on your campus, but also the broader academic community. Opportunities to broaden educational and cultural perspectives, and opportunities to mentor and evaluate students in depth.
Let me just jump in there. I want to tell everybody where these came from. We all owe these 5 to Texas A&M. Texas A&M was asked to tell us what they were looking for in the residency whenever they created a joint program at a distance at a doctoral level with Texas Tech University. We said, how can you tell us what you're going to get when these students are not in a traditional setting, meeting every day face-to-face? What are the outcomes that are important in a residency requirement? And this is what they came up with. We had a group that got together and endorsed that, and so these are the kinds of things that we're looking for. It's particularly important to us when it is at a distance that you're offering a doctoral program. We accept that if it's on campus, that these kind of things will be attended to, although I suppose that's debatable.
I'd also like to invite Kevin to weigh in here. The second clause in this particular criterion addresses on-campus residency requirements for programs that are presented in non-traditional ways, particularly distance education. And I want to remind you that it is necessary for you to have a separate conversation and separate approval with the board for any distance education or off-campus instruction program delivery. And Kevin can speak to that, I think, a little bit.
I would just say that when the Distance Education Advisory Committee reviews proposals for doctoral programs offered at a distance, they do expect to see they do expect that the students will have the opportunity to engage in intellectual community and intellectual culture typical of a doctoral program on campus, and that can be achieved in any number of ways.
So we try to write these rules in a way that are broad enough that they don't opt various methods of delivering a program out, but that they do state some clear expectations. We have 14 of these. I'm on number 9, so bear with me.
You have 1 minute.
I have 1 minute. Thank you, Kevin. I can talk real fast when I need to. Doctoral students need to be supported. And so we have a criterion addressing adequate financial assistance for doctoral students, particularly with a fledgling doctoral program that isn't well known already. You may not have the cohort of students beating down your doors that you hope you will, but it's important to be able to offer appropriate financial assistance as part of your recruiting, as well as support for the students while they're in the program. And this is part of the proposal that we frequently find comes up short. This is a fairly routine recommendation that consultants will make to us, that they're concerned that the students in the program would not be, a large enough percentage of students wouldn't be adequately supported to be able to achieve that critical mass of superior students. So also it's important for you all to look at how we're trying to weave these criteria together to create a safety net, not only for us at the state, but more importantly, for your institution, your department, and for the program and the faculty who would be offering the program. We don't want anything to go wrong once we've given the approval. That brings me to curriculum, a carefully planned program of study. While we were discussing this the other day, Joe observed that in the programs he's mentored through the design process, he feels that there's frequently been an over-design of curriculum and attention to the courses, but an over-design of the curriculum, but an under-design of the coursework, the qualifying exams, the steps and stages to completion. And it's not unheard of that we get a proposal and we don't see any mention in the description of the program of a qualifying exam or a comprehensive exam. It's not clear whether there'll be a defensive dissertation, and we have to write and say, what's going to happen? These are the kinds of things we don't want to have hold up our consideration. So it's important that you have a carefully planned, systematic program of study and a degree plan that's clear, comprehensive, and generally uniform. But of course, we want to see that flexibility that the best doctoral programs have to meet legitimate professional interests and special needs of the degree candidates. There needs to be a logical sequence through the stages of the degree itself. So we want to see a strong curriculum, we want to see strong course design, plus a clear pathway through those qualifying exams, the comprehensives, the defense, and so on. The plan should include a research dissertation or equivalent requirements to be judged by the doctoral faculty on the basis of quality, we say in this rule, rather than length. Physical facilities, we all know that you have to have a place to offer the program. You have to have office space for faculty that's appropriate and adequate. You have to have space for your teaching assistants, your research assistants, carrels for those students who are working on their dissertations or other research. You have to have space for administrative and technical support staff. You need seminar rooms, you need classrooms, you need laboratories, computer, electronic resources. You may need special facilities that we don't know about. Having personally shepherded 5 Masters of Audiology programs through to AUDs, I learned an awful lot about the special requirements of audiology programs, and it was very helpful to me in being aware that other doctoral programs I evaluate may have similar requirements. Library resources we've talked about already. We want to be sure that there's an adequate library, not just in terms of number of volumes, but in terms of the specific items that are on the shelves or that are electronically available to students. This has to be a conversation among faculty, library staff, and those people in the central administration who are responsible for funding. Program evaluation standards are very important, not just the SACS standards, although those are very important, and with the SACS emphasis on QEP and evaluation and accountability, again, we're working in concert rather than in opposition here. If there are accrediting standards and doctoral program criteria in a professional group, a professional accreditor, those need to be demonstrated to be met. If there are licensures or other certifications required before your graduate can practice, those need to be accounted for. It's surprising when they're not, but sometimes it happens. And in order to assure this, you're certainly able, and I know a number of you do, engage your own consultants during the process of developing the proposal so that you can then say, we hired these people in our field, they made these suggestions, and we followed through. That's always nice to know. It's important also for us, since we're talking about accreditors, to note that if an institution offers a first doctoral program, there aren't too many of you in the room for which this could be the case, but there are some institutions in our higher education system in Texas that don't currently offer doctoral level education. If you have not previously offered doctoral level work, you're required to notify the executive secretary or the Commission on Colleges for SACS 1 year in advance. That's a minimum, 1 year in advance of program implementation. So you need to let SACS know what's going on as part of your development of your proposal. These apply to cooperative, these criteria also apply to cooperative doctoral programs and to joint degree programs. And as you know, we have a 3-stage process for cooperative doctoral programs where an institution with an established program can, in essence, mentor another institution through the process of gaining a preliminary authority and then ultimately program authority to award the degree on their own. Approval of doctoral programs is always by board action with only a few exceptions, and those exceptions are also in our rules in Chapter 5, Section 5.50, Paragraph C. And I'm going to read those to you very quickly. There are a number of requirements listed, but for doctoral programs in particular, if the institution already offers a doctoral program or programs in a closely related discipline area, and if those programs are productive and offered at a demonstrably high level of quality, if the core faculty for the proposed program, since it's so closely related to one already approved, are already active and productive by contributing to the existing doctoral program at the institution, and no other university or health-related institution launches an objection during our official 30-day comment period that we always allow when your proposal arrives here, and if finally there's a very strong link between the doctoral program and workforce needs, then it is possible for a doctoral program to receive approval at the staff level by the commissioner rather than going to the board. You can see it's a very high bar and a very narrow needle eye to thread. So almost all doctoral programs do require board consideration at a quarterly board meeting. And I think with that, I'll stop and ask for questions, comments from my colleagues. Yes.
You can probably repeat it. Could you differentiate between cooperative and joint doctoral programs?
Yes. A joint program is one where both institutions are allowed to award the degree. Both institutions offer the degree, but they collaborate in sharing faculty, sharing resources, so that it's a sort of equals equation.
In fact, both institutions' name may be on the diploma.
Yes. The cooperative degree, I have here the standards for that somewhere, but instead of digging, basically there's a three-stage process where an institution that already has a successful degree program that they're offering can work with an institution that wants to offer the same program. And through those stages, which are enshrined in our rules, I think, no, they're not in rules, they're in our policy. The senior institution that already has the program helps the aspiring institution first to qualify for preliminary authority, then to begin to offer courses within the program, but still students would receive the degree at the institution already authorized. And ultimately, as the aspiring institution grows their resources, there comes a time when they can request the authority on their own, under their own aegis, and then award the degree in their own name.
Sometimes that last stage can take 20 or 30 years.
If there are no questions right now, we might take a brief break, a short break, because there's a few people in the audience going to sleep. We promise that the next part will be very engaging.
Not my fault.
It's no reflection on you, Catherine. No, can we take a 10-minute break?
10-minute break, 25 minutes till.
About meet your party at the front.
As we re-adjourn, let me make a reconvene. Did I say re-adjourn? Reconvene.
Wishful thinking, Kevin.
Yeah, it says adjourn. Okay. Let me make a quick announcement. Due to a new security change on our website that has created a massive firewall that has prevented everyone from watching this live broadcast, we just sent out an email to everyone telling them that they'll be able to view it starting noon on Monday.
Not very live.
Delayed from Golgotha.
So this is as live as it gets.
And after that break, we might have some questions. We'll be happy to answer any questions that you have at this point.
I had a question that I'll respond to, had a question during the break that I'll respond to on behalf of the questioner. I was asked, how do we know how to present all this stuff to you? We have online formats and actually a form that helps you move through the steps you need to create a proposal. So if you have questions about that, your provost or your graduate dean should be able to help you find that. But if not, we can also help you locate that. We don't expect you to do creative writing out there. We do have an actual format that we hope will make it easier for you to put all this information together in a coherent way.
Catherine, could I add to that? Having worked with a number of faculty groups with your format, and I have to say your format, now my format.
The agency's format.
The blank format sometimes isn't terribly illuminating. If you can beg, borrow, or steal somebody else's proposal and read through it and then match that up with the format, it's usually fairly helpful. And,
question. We need to get the microphone to you, otherwise it's not recorded on the live, quasi-live. Live.
I just wanted to say that I think the revised format for the master's and the bachelor's was outstanding, and I really would like to see something similar for the doctoral program.
You will.
Working on it.
Okay, you ready for the cost forms?
Okay, so you know you want to offer the program. You've got preliminary authority. And now you have to figure out, how are we going to pay for this? And this gets a little tricky because the way you justify a new degree request on your campus financially is probably a little different than the information we're going to be seeking. Because on your campus, people don't want to spend a lot of money. And they want to hear from you that you've got the best idea in the last decade, and that it's not going to cost a lot, and that it's going to bring, glory to the institution. And you usually can convince the powers that be to go ahead with this by saying, we're going to get so much formula funding for this. You will be so happy. We don't want to end the little party, but it's been our observation, and Joe spoke to this also a couple days ago, it's rare for formula funding to cover the expense of offering a doctoral program, particularly during the first 5 years when it's a startup. Doctoral education's very expensive, whether it's that program in medieval literature or whether it's a PhD in computer science. It costs a lot to offer a doctoral program. You can leverage resources, faculty, and physical that you already have, but nevertheless there will be new cost to the institution. There will also be new cost to the state because, as you're going to hear a little bit about during the next few minutes, doctoral education is funded at levels that can sometimes be almost 20 times the base funding unit for lower division undergraduate credit, depending on the discipline. So we fund doctoral education at a higher rate because we know it costs more, and it still generally does not cover the institutional cost to offer the program. And so to allow a faculty member or to allow a governing board to think that formula funding will solve the problem and save the day is probably not realistic. So how do we look at the financial end of developing a degree proposal? Well, we used to use these forms for all degree proposals. We have streamlined that somewhat for bachelor's and master's, but for doctoral education, we still want to take an in-depth look. We developed these charts several years ago, and they're due to be revised again, but for now, they're what we've got. So stay tuned, because we think we're going to revise them again. For right now, I'm going to walk you through the ones you would use if you started developing a proposal tomorrow, or if you have one in the works already. We basically want to ask three things. We want to know, how much is it going to cost you to offer this program? We want to know, where is that money going to come from? And we want to know whether you expect the program to pay for itself at the end of the 5-year startup. We have some special restrictions on using formula dollars during the first 5 years of a degree program. That's because you sometimes run into expenses you're not expecting. You sometimes are unable to recruit, support the number of students you were anticipating enrolling. Things sometimes start up a little slower than you expect. And if you're counting on formula funding, you have to understand that in the Texas system, and Joe can speak eloquently to this, having helped develop this set of formula products, you're not going to get funded for at least a year, possibly 2 years, for new courses that you offer, because until you have offered them during a base period, they don't factor into the formula. So let's take a look at what we seek to know. This is going to be slightly different, although related to how you sell the financial end of this on your campus. So don't think we're looking for the same thing the president is, because we're probably not. We need to know, first of all, how much will it cost your institution to pay for personnel to offer this program? You probably have faculty on board already. You may need to hire some. How much new cost would there be for the first 5 years, and during which year would you incur that? If you're going to shift some money around and reassign some faculty out of the bachelor's and master's programs into the PhD or EdD or whatever other flavor of doctoral education you want to offer, how much are you going to need to reallocate, and how are you going to cover the hole that leaves in the programs you're already offering? If you are going to have a faculty member administering the program, somebody's got to be in charge. Is that going to be new money? Is that going to be a reallocation? What will happen to the part of that faculty member's teaching load that they won't be performing now because they'll be doing administration for the new doctoral program? How about those graduate assistants? You need to attract really great students to get this program off the ground, and you can't do it on $5,000 a year per student. It just won't work. So where are you going to get the money for your graduate assistants, whether they're research or teaching assistants? If you are going to move some of the master's student graduate assistant money into the doctoral pot, what will happen to those master's students? We want to know not just what's going to happen in order to be able to offer the doctoral program. We want to know, what are the consequences for your programs that are already established that you're trying to demonstrate to us are strong undergraduate and master's programs. And then, of course, clerical and other staff, IT staff. How are you going to pay for them? Will you reassign? Will you say, this person can do that too, And how realistic is that? So all the way through this process, you need to be asking yourself the hard questions, because if you don't, we will.
Let me just jump in here a little bit. What are we looking for when we're looking at faculty salaries and salaries for graduate assistants and so forth? We have a pretty good idea about what assistant professors, associate professors, and full professors make, and that information is available here at the coordinating board, and we check that. If you say you're going to hire a full professor for $45,000, it just won't wash. So be realistic in the amounts that you are putting down there, and have it be in a competitive area for the discipline that you're talking about too. I can tell you for some business assistant professors, they're very expensive. So be realistic there in the amounts that, because we look at that. The same thing goes for graduate assistants, and I'll speak to that a little bit later. Make sure that the amount you're going to pay is competitive. And when we're talking about graduate assistants, we're talking basically about your full-time students. It really doesn't apply to part-time students. But for full-time students, we feel like they should be supported, and it ought to be an amount that's competitive there. So we look at the amounts. Another question that comes up frequently is, should we load these salaries? Well, to be more accurate, you probably should. What's a good load for a salary? Somewhere probably between 25 and 33% is average. Some may be a little bit higher, some may be a little bit lower. Should you add in there an inflation factor? Well, if you want to be more accurate, do that. So it ought to be reasonable. Take these things into consideration. I know that some institutions have spreadsheets that already build those factors in, and they can just put a number in, and it goes all the way up 5 years, totals up in an Excel spreadsheet fashion. So we're looking at realistic numbers there.
Roger, you mentioned the inflation factor. That really can go either way, but whatever, either included in both cost and revenue or excluded, just be consistent. It's probably not terribly important if it bothers you to put that in. Just leave it out, but be sure you leave it out on both sides.
And it always helps if you leave some tracks. Let us know in notes. You can footnote this stuff and let us know what you've chosen to do, but that's always helpful.
Let me say something else. It's misleading to us if you don't go through the provost level whenever we ask for changes, because in effect we assume that the institution is committing to changes. So when we look at changes in salary amounts or whatever amounts, we assume that the provost is involved to commit the institution and not just at a faculty, department head, or dean's level. The institution is in effect committing those resources.
That's right. The trail for a proposal has to go through the central university administration. It has to go through the provost's office and should be checked there. And you should be checking detailed stuff. Is it the right zip code? Is the contact information for the person you're going to want talking to the coordinating board about this proposal still accurate? Sometimes these proposals take years to create. People leave. New people come. And it's tough for us if we get a phone number and email address for somebody who left your institution 2.5 years ago. When the provost and president has finished with the proposal, it generally has to go to the governing board, and usually the governing board then transmits it to us, to system. Yeah. I try to say governing board because there are a few that are not part of a system, and I don't want to leave them out. So if you're a department chair or a faculty member, you're not going to send that proposal to us, because we'll send it right back, say, need more signatures. Okay, so in addition to the personnel that will make this go, we also need to know how much it's going to cost you for equipment and for facilities. If you will be hiring new people, you're going to need a place to put them. You're going to need computers and printers and other equipment, depending on the discipline, so that they can function effectively in their jobs. This is whether they're faculty, teaching assistants, research assistants, or clerical staff or other staff. What are your library resources going to require? again, I mentioned this needs to be a conversation among faculty, library staff, and again, the provost's office. Whoever's going to take responsibility for signing off on this has to be sure that the fiscal side of the house is also in order and that the university is ready to make that commitment. How about supplies and materials? If you're going to have heavy laboratory usage, you're probably going to have a fairly hefty supply budget. A PhD in microbiology with zero for supplies and materials is going to raise questions here, okay? We look for things to make sense. We're not trying to tell you what answers we want you to fill in, but we want to give you the idea that we think about these things as deeply as you do, and that we want things to make sense, okay? We're not looking for some, oh, the coordinating board needs it this way, although we try to give you a lot of guidance because you tell us you want us to tell you that. But you know, sensible is good.
I was going to talk about
The
other line, the last line there is where institutions normally include travel for conferences and
accreditation expense,
startup packages for faculty, and those kind of things we see most often in the other row.
I know some professional accreditation is a multi-year deal and very expensive. That's a good thing to put in there. If you're going to host a research center as part of the doctoral program, there's some costs there also. So after you've told us how much it costs, you need to tell us how you're going to pay for it. And that's the second part of this. For this chart, we have appended a little crib sheet, and unfortunately, it's not unlike some of the IRS instructions that you fill out about line 1, line 2, line 3. So, you know, we're trying to help. We'll see if it actually does. We've tried to guesstimate the general categories from which your institution could draw funds to support this program for the first 5 years until it can support itself. You'll notice the first one, hey, we're realists, is that formula income. The state legislature appropriates dollars through a formula system, and that's part of how higher education in the public system in Texas is sustained. I mentioned that for the first 2 years of a program, if you're offering new courses, it's unlikely that you will receive any formula funding for those courses until they've been offered during a base period. Our policy has been that we don't allow formula dollars to be used to account for the budget for the first 2 years of a degree proposal. Staff has had a number of discussions about whether this is realistic or not. And Roger, you may want to say something here.
I was going to say something about something else.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead.
For the 3rd through 5th years of the program, we're encouraging you to decide, and you use one of 2 figures here. If your formula income is going to exceed more than half of the cost that you will incur, just account for half of the cost. If you don't think your formula is going to come up to that mark, put the amount you think you're going to earn. So let's say in year 3 you need $350,000 to run your program for year 3. Okay? If your formula is going to be $110,000 and that's what you think you're going to earn, put that in. But if you think you're going to earn $600,000, you can only put in half of that $350,000 figure, or $175,000. Priscilla.
What is the rationale for that?
She wants to know what the rationale is for that.
Well, as I have heard this discussed numerous times here, we aren't telling you that you're not allowed to use formula that you earn. We want to know if this program doesn't get off the ground as quickly or as completely as you hope it will, the institution has to have a way to support the program for 5 years. The institution makes a commitment to support this program for 5 years. So if you earn that $600,000 in your third year, by all means use it for this program. But we have to look at the worst case scenario. What if you give a party and not everybody comes? What if you don't earn the amount of formula that you think you will? What if circumstances change? You have to be able to give the program an appropriate time to grow.
And now that Catherine's giving the rationale for it, and Priscilla's not the only one who's asked that question over the past few years, fill out the form best you can, and then if you can come up with a better form and a better way of answering this question of this is what it'll cost, this is where we think the revenue will come from, and this is what we've built in as a cushion and as a way of managing risk, we'd welcome a better way of doing it, but hadn't been found in the last 20 years. So I just leave that to you as a challenge. The real issue, as Catherine has said from the beginning, realistic estimates of cost, including all of the categories and including those things that you're going to have to pay for because you've shifted costs. Realistic estimates of the revenue, including the lags and the time it takes to get the formula money in, and then an appropriate allowance for uncertainties that are there. And you've all been involved one time or another in some kind of a construction project. You have a contingency fund. You have to have some allowance for the things that go wrong. If it's a remodeling project, you better have a bigger contingency fund than for the new one, because you don't know what's behind the walls that you're tearing down. Same issues here, and give us the benefit of the form as we've designed it, because it's the way we can get into it the quickest, and then take us from there with whatever form you think is better.
I just have a brief comment. Where does the formula come from? Well, the amounts in the formula come from the appropriations bill. It came from the appropriation bill in 2005, and in 2007 we'll have new numbers. So that's where it comes from.
The rest of this form is pretty self-explanatory. Other state funding, you may have line items. You may have special regional funding. There may be some other kind of state money that you can use. If you're going to reallocate existing resources, we talked about that on the cost sheet. Let us know what. Let us know from where. It isn't enough to say reallocated. We'd like to have a little more information, please, about where's this money coming from. Retirements? Downsizing? Let us know. Federal funding, this says in hand only on my copy, but it doesn't up there, and we've loosened this up a little bit in the last few years. Generally, we used to say if you didn't have the research money in the bank, it was vapor money. You've heard of vaporware? Vapor money. But there are, particularly with some federal title grants, there's a pretty good expectation that if you have a particular kind of problem, you're going to be able to get a particular kind of grant for research. Depending on how reliable this is, we are sometimes now able to look at money applied for that there's a pretty good chance you'll get. But you need to tell us how you know it's a pretty good chance. Of course, funds in hand are terrific, and we want to know about that. Then we have this other funding down here. That's the, be creative. If you have a donor, if you've got a lot of soda machines in the dorm that you're not doing anything else with, whatever works. We have, if you can just scroll down, the other part of this form is where you can let us know what you're doing, and then the guidelines, particularly for how to do the formula part. And it's not a real extensive form when you think about it, but it gives us an idea of what the cash flow is going to be, and that's really what we need to go forward.
Thanks, Catherine. Okay, I want to spend some time talking about sources and process for evaluating a doctoral proposal. Let me talk about the process first, and then I'll walk you through some selected sources. Generally, when a proposal comes into the building here, it's assigned to a program director with past experience and our education in that area. It's not always possible, but we try to align that as much as possible. That takes 3 to 5 days to do that. And I'll tell you about my process, and I think it's a common process for most of the program directors here. The first read for a proposal is to just get a general overall impression, kind of see what it's talking about, and get a sense for where the degree is going to be strong and maybe weak. And the second time we read it, I read it in depth, and page by page, word by word. And as I'm reading the second time in depth, I write down questions, specific questions about areas that don't answer the mail, that don't respond to the criteria that Catherine's gone over. And then we seek clarifications from the point of contact that's mentioned in the proposal. So we call up the institution, talk to the point of contact, and say, explain this or explain that, or how are you going to, how did you come up with the numbers that you have? Generally, this takes 2 to 4 weeks. As part of that 2 to 4 weeks, we as program directors do independent research to satisfy a verification of some of the criteria. That can take 1 to 3 weeks as we're looking on the web, mainly nowadays, to find out some of the answers to the questions we're looking at, and also to verify some of the publications and those kind of things that I'll mention a little bit later. So 1 to 3 weeks there. Now, when all of those answers are acceptable to us as program directors, then and only then do we line up consultants, the 3 consultants I mentioned earlier. And at that time, we'll ask the institution to give us a list of candidates for consultants. When we look for consultants for the site visit, we're looking for them to be out of state for obvious reasons, but we also want them to come from successful doctoral programs in the area that we are investigating. So both of those criteria are primary criteria when we ask for a list of consultants from the institution. Coincidentally to that, we generate our own list of consultants. So we go out and look for prominent programs with individuals that can accompany us on a site visit. Once we have a list of 1 to 3 consultants that are generated by us, the coordinating board, we vet those names at the institution. We don't want there to be any surprises. Someone shows up and they were unsuccessful candidate for a job there. So we vet those names and give the institution time to tell us that name sounds fine. And then we schedule the site visit, and that generally occurs a couple of months out away from the next quarterly board meeting. Okay? So there's a lot that goes on. I mentioned in my earlier presentation that if there's a critical flaw in the proposal, we never get to the consultant stage. That goes back to the institution for remedies before it comes back to us. So that's the general process that we follow. And Kevin, a little bit later, will talk about the site visit per se. I won't get into that now. What I'd like to do is talk about selected key items from Rule 5.46 that Catherine so eloquently covered earlier. The first criterion is strong programs at the bachelor and master's level. We use PrEP. That's online. You can use that too. All we're looking for there generally is the enrollment in those programs and the graduation. And we've got a 5-year trend. The trend ought to be at least steady. It'd be good if it was up. But if it's going down, something's wrong. So we're looking for strong bachelor's and master's program. We're looking at the need for the program itself. And I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but we check BLS, Texas Workforce Commission, and other sites to give us an indication that the graduates from the program are going to be able to find a job in 4 to 5 years. Faculty resources. Key issue, Catherine emphasized, is probably the most important resource for any doctoral program, the faculty themselves. When we look at faculty, we want to make sure that the PhDs are from reputable institutions, and an array of institutions is better than just having it from a couple of institutions. So if they are from prominent programs across the country, that's a strength. We look carefully at each faculty member's curriculum vitae. We read that line by line, as Kevin said, word by word, to make sure that they're quality individuals. We look at the publications specifically over the last 5 years. It doesn't help us to make an assessment if publications occurred before that time. If they occurred during the past 5 years, that tells us that the research or the faculty member is actively researching and publishing. What's the right? Here's another rule of thumb. What's the right number of publications per year? 1 to 2, probably, although some journals are very prestigious, have long, maybe a year and a half timeline to publish, but they are absolutely at the top of the profession, and that would have a little more weight than ones that were not at the top of the list. How do we know what publications to look for in a discipline? I can tell you what I do. I call departments in prominent universities with doctoral programs, and I ask the department chair. You may get a call from me at some time. What are the prominent journals in your field? And I look for those journals to be represented in the faculty vitae. If they're not, I've got questions about it.
I also look at the editorial boards of journals to determine whether or not they're made up of individuals from top-ranked programs, existing programs around the country.
Peer-reviewed book chapters, so forth. In the past, I've not had time recently, but in the past I've gone to the library and read selected articles that are published by the faculty, so you get a sense for the quality of the research. So we look at those kind of things very closely. We look for a good rank distribution of faculty. We don't want faculty to be top-heavy or bottom-heavy. If it is, then that's a problem, for reasons that you can determine on your own. So we ought to have a fairly good distribution across all 3 ranks of faculty. It was mentioned earlier, we look for dissertation chair experience, so when you put together proposals, mention that for us, would you? Dissertation chair experience. And we look for a sufficient number of faculty. I gave you the rule of thumb earlier, 3 to 1, to mentor students through the dissertation, or dissertation rather, although that's just a rule of thumb. Teaching loads of faculty was mentioned 2-3. Here's a rule of thumb we generally use as we look across degree levels. For doctoral faculty, 2-2. That's 2 in each long semester courses apiece. For master's faculty, 3-3. For bachelor's faculty, 4-4. For associate degrees, 5-5. And that, is a fairly good rule of thumb. So as you're thinking about being able to pay for your program, think about 2-2, or not too far away from that. All right, critical mass of superior students. There are 2 basic designs that I've seen for doctoral programs. One is a post-baccalaureate program, and the other is a post-master's program. Rule of thumb that we use for post-bachelor's programs is 90 semester credit hours. Rule of thumb for post-master's degree programs is 60 hours. Again, rule of thumb for your curriculum, it ought to be around that. If it's not around that, then we need to know why. Generally, a minimum of 5 students, doctoral students in a class. That's how many you need to have an effective class. Now, if you have cohorts of just 2 to 3 per year, how do you do that? Well, there are a lot of creative ways of doing that. One of the ways to do that is to have stacked classes. That is to say, you can have master's degree and doctoral students in the same class. What you do as a faculty member is you require more of the doctoral students. Another way is to use 2 cohorts. Have your key classes offered every other year, and so you can sweep 2 cohorts together and get the number of students that you need in the class. But we think 5 students is a minimum number for you to have an effective interchange. I think admissions should speak to the whole person when you're looking for students to be admitted into your program. It's against the law, for example, as you all know, to use a standardized test to eliminate someone from a program. Can't do that. What we're seeing more and more is that programs are inviting candidates in for interviews. They want to ask them a lot of questions to make sure they're selecting the right people. We talked about residency earlier in the afternoon. Adequate financial assistance for doctoral students. It's important to look at what the average rate is for students. And I'm just going to throw this number out. And there'll be some disciplines below it and some disciplines above it. But $18,000 a year for half-time is not unusual for full-time doctoral graduate assistants. So if you're going to pay them a lot less than that, we need to know why. If you're going to pay them a lot more than that, we need to know how. Yes, question.
9 to 12 months for that.
That's a full year half-time. All right, let's talk a little bit about the curriculum. And the reason I say full year is because these are full-time students, and they don't, they're going full-time. Let's talk a little bit about curriculum. It ought to be similar to other high-quality programs. The proposal should address, if you're using a model in another institution, what that model is, and we can go take a look at it too. But the best place to start is to find out what some of the best programs are in your discipline. Look at the curriculum, and many of these are online, and use that as a model to shape what you want to do in the program you're proposing. If it's a post-master's program and you're admitting master's students not in a specific discipline, you're going to need to have leveling courses. We need to know what those leveling courses are. And you need to make sure that they're offered on a basis so that folks can move through smoothly. We also mentioned this earlier. I personally was involved in an institution that did not have an exam for candidacy. All they were proposing was a project, and discussion occurred when we had the site visit, asking them how they were going to determine that there was a mastery of the discipline if they didn't have an exam. Well, it's easy to offer a project. It's tougher to have an exam because then you got to show how you're going to test them and retest them and so forth and so on. So we look for exams. We want to make sure that there's some way to assess students. And it ought to require dissertation. What's the rule of thumb for dissertation? The one we see most often is 12 semester credit hours at a minimum. Now, some dissertations will be a lot more than that, but at least 12 semester credit hours for the dissertation. Facilities and special equipment. It would be helpful to us, particularly if it's an area that we don't have any background in, that you have faculty validate, that is confirming the type of equipment that you have. A way of doing that is to get some validation from another, and you can go to a Texas institution if you wish, for all the equipment that you've got. And if you're pursuing a degree, a doctoral degree in bioengineering, and there's a real good bioengineering at Health Science Center in Houston, the department head can call there and say, look, this is the equipment that we've got. Can you help us, and would you be willing to confirm that this equipment is sufficient? That helps us look to be able to determine that, and we will, when we're at the site visit, ask our consultants to do the same thing. Library resources. We need the library director's statement of adequacy as part of a requirement, but particularly helpful to me is the methodology that's used in determining the adequacy of the holdings. And here's an example that's used often. Library directors will go to an institution that offers the doctorate in this discipline and ask the library director what their holdings are. It will compare that institution's holdings to what is available at the proposing institution, and then that forms the basis for the budget and the acquisition plan to bring the library up to speed. so that the library is adequate. And as Catherine mentioned as well, it's imperative that the faculty agree with the library director's assessment and budget for the acquisition of holdings. That's what we call closing the loop. Everybody needs to be aware that these holdings will be sufficient.
There's some professional organizations that provide guidelines to institutions on what a library collection supporting a doctoral program should look like as well.
Yeah, and that's helpful when that occurs. Here's some other issues, and these are mentioned in the Policy and Procedures Manual on pages 11 through 17, and I'll just hit a few of those. You need to speak to the educational objectives of the program. Now, basically, I think there are three fundamental objectives of doctoral programs. One is teaching, the second is research, and the third is administration. Administration is noted a lot in the EDD programs, or the educational administration programs, where people are being prepared to go into practice for the discipline. And so that's part of the objective of a particular program. If teaching and preparing graduates for the academia is one of your objectives, show how you're going to train the students to do that. Either mandatory teaching assistantships or some kind of mentoring process, so that we have an idea that the students are going to get proper training, so when they become faculty, they will have some experience in that regard. Research kind of stands on its own because we're talking about a research degree, and clearly that's part of any curriculum, I think, although having internships would be a boost there. If you have internships available for researchers, industry internships, that would be a positive thing for the program. We need a semester-by-semester course projection of the courses for the program, and be realistic in this. For example, if you're proposing 20 new courses, doctoral courses, and some programs do, you need to have a reasonable presentation over time of those courses. You can't present them all in the first part of the program. And you need to talk about the faculty that are going to be doing those course preps. It takes a long time. As you all know, it takes a long time to do a course prep. So be realistic on how you're going to present those 20 new courses if that's your case. We identify institutions with similar programs, and I personally use gradschools.com. I go there almost the first thing to look at the list, and it's done regionally by discipline, and it's available on the web for you to see. It has a list of all master's and doctoral programs in particular disciplines, and you can find out where they are, and then go to the institution and look at the programs for comparison. I do that frequently. You need to estimate the enrollment FTE for each of the first 5 years of your students. That's critical to estimate formula funding. We need to know what that is. I can tell you what our rule of thumb is for FTE, and that's 18 semester credit hours per year. Defines a full-time equivalent student. Now, sometimes programs have more than that. Sometimes they have less than that. If you vary much from the 18 semester credit hours, let us know what your methodology is so we can calculate formula funding based upon what you're calling an FTE. We mentioned a little bit earlier that some programs are contingent upon new faculty members. Here's the way that works. If your proposal's viability is contingent upon faculty additions, then we need here at the coordinating board to see the vitae for the incoming faculty member. We need to see a copy of the contract and the acceptance letter of the incoming faculty member. We need to have some confidence that you're actually adding someone that you said you were going to add. And those kind of documents are things that we use. Now, I know that always doesn't mean the faculty member will show up. I've dealt with that. You have too. But at least we have a little bit higher confidence level that faculties will show up. The last thing I want to say is, what is a dissertation? We all tend to remember what we did with a dissertation, but I can tell you that there are some new developments in what actually is a dissertation, and I ran across this in my last site visit at UTSA down San Antonio, and that was a description of a San Antonio main body that was composed of a series of short studies, 4 to 5 studies, in the body of the dissertation. My question to the consultants that brought this up was, are they linked in some fashion? And the answer was, they don't have to be. What is the purpose of having that kind of body in a dissertation? And it's fairly clear. They want to give some impetus to publications. And so it's very easy to turn these 4 to 5 studies into publications while a student. Now, I raised the question about what is a dissertation for you to think creatively about the dissertation experience, and there's a lot going on out there. Some of that you'll discover from the consultants. Some of that you'll discover by going to the site of existing programs, but a lot is happening there. That's me. Go ahead.
Is it my turn?
Yes, it is.
Okay, well, are there any questions? I think Roger might talk faster than I do, so if you have any questions, you better ask now. I was going to respond to actually a couple of things. Yeah.
What was the consensus on this, putting together a couple of papers into a dissertation? I reviewed one, I can tell you, was terrible. They were kind of linked, but couldn't any get a real sense of the flow to it.
Right.
And they keep repeating a lot of preliminary information at the front.
I think the jury's still out, to be honest. The question was, what is the consensus of the consultants about the advisability of using this new model for dissertation? 2 out of the 3 consultants said they're doing that already. The third had some questions about it. I think it can be done well, but it's not the same across all disciplines. Question?
There are other old European model where you wrote 4 or 5 papers, and if everything looked good, you got your degree. It's old.
That was mentioned, and it's new to American education, I think, and particularly new in some disciplines. That hasn't been the case, and I just throw that out for your consideration.
Are the 12 credits for the dissertation included in the 60 minimum credits?
Yes.
Are the leveling courses for a postmaster included in the 60?
No. The question was, are the leveling courses for postmaster's program included in the 60? And the answer is no.
So are they included in the chart for the curriculum when you show required, prescribed, electives, pre-electives?
They should be part of the curriculum that you put in the proposal if they're leveling courses. That's just part. You're thinking about the new bachelor's and master's form. That's not the case for the doctoral form. The doctoral is more free flow right now. So you would list that probably at the beginning of your curriculum as leveling courses if a master's degree holder came into the program and didn't have the prerequisites for some of the doctoral courses.
You had mentioned $18,000 as a kind of a typical fee for 12-month full-time study. For half-time?
Yes.
18,000 was mentioned as 12-month half-time salary for graduate assistants, TAs. And I was wondering, when you come up with that number, are you taking into account the costs of tuition and fees or not?
No, we're not taking that into consideration. Tuition and fees would be in addition to that, as well as hospitalization if it's available at your institution. These are expensive students, and they're expensive faculty, and that's part of the theme that we're echoing across a lot of these criteria that we're mentioning today.
I just wanted to say a couple of things. I want to make sure that everyone understands that we are happy to be as transparent as possible in describing how we evaluate a proposal for a doctoral program. Sometimes it's an art, sometimes it's a science, but it's never a secret. So hopefully we're giving you some information that will be helpful to you. For example, when Roger was talking about need, trying to confirm a need for individuals, additional individuals trained at the doctoral level in a particular discipline, even though it's the burden of the institution to document well the need for those individuals, sometimes it's difficult to do, and we have to look around. So, for example, I will call the chairs of departments of established programs around the country and ask them, how many students are you accepting? How many students are you graduating? Are they getting jobs? Where are they getting jobs? Are they having problems getting jobs? Why is that the case? So we work really hard to gain an understanding of the need for additional graduates in whatever discipline we're reviewing, and to try to build a case, basically. Another thing that I ask when I talk to chairs of departments is, what stipend level do you provide to your graduate students to gain an idea of what is common in the discipline? We also ask them, Roger talked about, and I wish he hadn't given numbers, 1 to 2 publications per year, but I'm just kidding.
That's a rule of thumb.
Okay. Especially for junior faculty, what do you expect your junior faculty to publish to be able to gain tenure? And where do you expect them to publish? Because we realize that you can have some junior faculty on staff who are building their research agendas and will need some time. Just wanted to make that clear. So if you all have any questions, please ask.
Back to the graduate assistants. You mentioned $18,000 per year. 9 months or 12 months?
That's 12 months.
Thank you.
Kevin, I think you're up.
Okay, should I talk about the site visit now?
You got it.
Okay. This is actually the fun part. I promise the fun part. So once the staff are reasonably confident that the institution has documented and established the need and has the resources in place to launch a new doctoral program, we move forward with coordinating a site visit. And as Roger mentioned before, we hire 3 outside consultants, experts in the field, to assist us in evaluating the institution's ability to launch and sustain a new doctoral program. What happens during the site visit? The site visit typically lasts 1 day unless we have to go to multiple institutions. And the consultants and the coordinating board staff meet with a number of different groups of individuals and visit facilities at the campus. We meet with administrators, the president typically, provost, deans, and chairs of departments that would support the program. We want to get a good feel for how the proposed program fits into the goals of the institution, and to determine the level of commitment at the administrative level for the new doctoral program. But the most important meeting is with the faculty, because the faculty are those individuals who are they are the program. They're going to be delivering the program. We spend the most time with the faculty, the core faculty and any support faculty from other departments who might support the program as well. On the last site visit that I went to, the consultants recommended that for future site visits, we meet separately with senior faculty versus junior faculty, because they really want to hear whether or not the junior faculty are supported. Next, we meet, if they're available, we meet with prospective students of the program as well to get an idea of what their experience is and whether or not they're supported both financially and emotionally in terms of mentorship, relationships with faculty. We visit any of the facilities that would support the program. That includes specially designed classrooms, simulation labs, clinical labs, experimental labs. We look at the equipment, or rather the consultants look at the equipment. My PhD is in French and Spanish linguistics, so I have absolutely no idea what a piece of equipment relating to chemical engineering has to do with anything. But I learned a lot. On one site visit, I have to say, on one site visit we went to an institute, a research institute, and I was accompanied by a board member, a coordinating board member. And after this large piece of equipment was described to us for about 10 minutes, some piece of equipment that had been on some space shuttle at some point, the coordinating board member looked at the guy and said, "I'm just waiting for you to tell me what kind of wine is served with space food." So, I refrain from asking those questions. At the end of the site visit, the consultants give their report back to the administrators and to the faculty about their findings. They identify the strengths of the proposed program, and they identify any weaknesses and provide recommendations for improving the program. Following the site visits, the consultants submit a written report to us, and we deliver that immediately to the institution. The institution has the opportunity to respond to each and every recommendation with either a plan for implementing the recommendation or a strong rationale for not doing so. The consultant's report and the institutional response, of course, are factored into the coordinating board staff's final recommendation to the board. Now I thought I'd give you a little information about the kinds of things we learn on site visits and the kinds of recommendations we typically see in the consultant's report. We oftentimes learn whether the research labs and equipment, if applicable, are adequate to support the research of the faculty. This is extremely important. And the consultants have the opportunity to see firsthand what kind of research the experimental faculty are conducting and whether it's important. It's also up to the consultants to tell us whether or not the faculty supporting the program have already gained national prominence or have the potential to gain national prominence. We can't do that. That's what they do. They know better than us where the researchers should be publishing and what kind of research matters in their field. I'll tell you a quick story on one site visit that Roger and I were on a couple of years ago. When the consultants met with the faculty, the first thing they did was apologize for being there. They said, "We're really embarrassed to be here, given that you have Dr. So-and-so on the faculty, who is probably the most prominent researcher in this field over the last 40 years." That told us a lot, and that told us something we weren't able to discern ourselves just by reading a proposal. Another important thing that the consultants are able to do is help us identify any gaps in the composition of the faculty in terms of areas of expertise that are important for a doctoral program in a particular discipline. And they also help us to determine whether or not the junior faculty members are adequately supported, as I said before, and are able to build a strong research program and eventually gain tenure. The interview with the students is also very revealing and rewarding. Like I said, the consultants learn a lot. At the last site visit I went on, the consultants remarked that they wished their own students were so engaged and so loyal. And one of the things they noted is that the group of faculty proposing this doctoral program had engaged undergraduates in research early on, and that really encouraged them to go on to graduate school and obviously gave them a lot of great experience. Some of the common recommendations that we see in consultants' reports, you need more faculty, for example, and they sometimes identify or make recommendations about what area of expertise those hires should be. They also tell us sometimes that student financial support is not nationally competitive and should be adjusted. They make recommendations regarding facilities or equipment. I've been on site visits where experimental labs have not been adequately equipped, and that has a direct impact on the faculty members' ability to do high-quality research. We've also seen recommendations regarding the administrative structure of the program and whether or not it will enhance the program's ability to gain national prominence or whether or not it's prohibitive. For example, one consultant recommendation was that instead of housing the program within an existing related department, that the institution should create a new department, and that would help the program achieve greater recognition nationally. Consultants oftentimes make recommendations regarding specific journals that the institution needs to subscribe to that would support the doctoral program from the library. The level of startup funds for new faculty is not sufficient to attract the caliber of, and this is a direct quote, to attract the caliber of faculty needed to make the proposed program successful. And I'm not sure if Roger mentioned this or not, but startup packages are very important in certain disciplines, and we see a range depending on the needs of the faculty member. In the last couple of years, I've seen for faculty members in the sciences and engineering anywhere between $40,000 to $500,000 in startup packages. Lost my place. I don't want to miss this one. Okay, thank you. I don't want to skip this one. The faculty teaching load is too high and should be reduced. I think we hear that almost every single time we go on a site visit. As I was talking to a few people during the break about how all of these factors of faculty teaching load, number of courses, number of faculty advising dissertations, how this all factors in. As the program grows and develops, you're going to have more and more students at the dissertation level and more faculty directing dissertations with hopefully more course release. So that means more people necessary to teach those core courses that we talked about earlier and those advanced courses to allow students to advance in a timely fashion.
Let me just mention this course load is a challenge for many institutions as they reduce the number of courses. They're very expensive doctoral faculty teach, and how they kind of balance the budget. We talk about programs becoming self-supporting in 5 years. They need to do that. One institution did this by adding a fee to each one of the doctoral courses, and so that was a way they were able to balance the budget, so to speak. There's a lot of ways to do that that are available to an institution.
And I want to read one more quote, too, that I think is really important, and it relates to external research funding. One consultant's report said this: "We recommend strongly that the faculty build a collective strategy for getting funding. The current state of funding in this discipline is not good, and we believe that it's not a good idea to pursue a scattered collection of funding opportunities. Some strategy that takes advantage of specific local strengths is far more likely to be successful in the long run." Those are my quotes for the day. And I'll just end with making a statement that I think we made earlier. The consultant's report is extremely important in the process of reviewing a new doctoral program. As I said, the institutions have the opportunity to respond to each and every recommendation, and the coordinating board staff approval is sometimes contingent upon the institution responding adequately and satisfactorily to the recommendations of the consultant's report. Thank you very much. Any questions? Do I talk faster than Roger?
I think we're ready for the sort of the general questions now that you have. I will make sort of one comment here. Deal breakers, if the need's not there, you're probably not going to get preliminary authority. If the faculty research strength is not there, you're probably not going to get the proposal approved, no matter how much other fine-tuning and tweaking and discussion we have. So if you want to just take away two sort of bottom line, if you can't demonstrate the need, don't bother with the rest of the developing the request for preliminary authority. If you don't have the faculty, don't bother filling out the rest of the forms for the proposal. And I'm saying that as much as anything, not based on what I'm learning from my colleagues in my short time here, but from working on the other side where you're sitting. So there's some things that are just not worth spending all the time writing and holding committee meetings on. I think we're ready for questions from wherever, but in order to get them recorded so that they can go out on the web on Monday, if you would get your hand up and then wait for the microphone. Priscilla?
I think it would be helpful to hear the staff's feelings about programs that are truly interdisciplinary, where you have master's, maybe doctoral students sitting in the same class with students who are in two other different programs.
It depends on the program of study that you've designed and the curriculum that you've got and what you want to call a degree. We want to make sure that whatever it is you're graduating and awarding degrees in match your program of study.
And we do a lot of research to gain an understanding of a discipline that we're not very familiar with. If it's an established interdisciplinary discipline, then we look at existing ones around the country. If it's an emerging field, we talk to people around the country to determine whether or not this is an important emerging field and if it makes sense to group traditional disciplines in the way that the proposal has done so.
One follow-up. Okay, one follow-up. What is your view about how you would allocate the cost of that to the new program that you're proposing?
Allocation basically refers to existing faculty that are now going to be teaching in this new program. And so it's a proportionality issue. If the faculty member was teaching in another program and they're going to now be teaching a new course in this new program, it's that proportion of the faculty's cost. That's reallocated.
Let me go a little bit further on the answer to that question. The real issue is what is the incremental or the new cost? What cost do you incur as a result of bringing about this new program? So if you've got a class that's already being taught in another program and it's going to continue and you're just going to add a few students to it, you don't need to allocate any of that cost. On the other hand, if you've created a new course that is going to be used to support this program, then there is a cost associated with that, even though it may be taught by a faculty member who's still on your payroll.
I have a question about, you mentioned qualifying exams, obviously an integral part to make sure it's a quality program. Do you have any comments on metrics? I mean, if it's 100% pass rate, I don't know what the qualifying exam tells you. If it's 25%, well, you know, I mean, do you have any comments on pass rates and content of the exam?
Now, are you referring to the exam for candidacy? That's what you're referring to? By the time students get to candidacy, they ought to be fairly well prepared. We wouldn't expect them to flunk that exam. But most often we see a two-time trial. That is, if they don't pass it the second time, then sometimes they get what has been euphemistically referred to as a consolation master's degree. Sometimes.
If I recall correctly, at the beginning you indicated that the terms substantive and non-substantive changes were archaic. But what are the guidelines and modifications of an existing doctoral program that has to come before the coordinating board?
That's a good question.
Use a substantive report.
Use a
Use the substantive section in the Policies and Procedures Manual, pages 11 through 17.
I think what you may be asking is, how do you know when you have a new program on your hands rather than just a track in an existing program?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. That's something of a judgment call, but we tend to think when about, a quarter to a third of the actual curriculum, the content of the degree is different. If it leads to a different career path, if it requires demonstrating a new set of skills, if you would want to substantially redesign the qualifying exam, those are all good indicators. We used to just simply say 25% of the coursework or more at any level you would need to look at authority for a standalone program. It's not necessarily that cut and dried now. Kevin, you may want to add to this.
I was just going to add that if the curriculum has changed over time in such a way that it is no longer best described by the current CIP code, that it would require a change in classification of instructional programs code, then that would be a new program.
And this is nothing new. I mean, emerging fields happen all the time, and they don't just happen in technology areas. But, we can think about computer engineering. Where did that come from? There's the software engineering. There are a number of examples of new programs emerging out of established ones. And some of them, Priscilla, have been interdisciplinary. I'm thinking about materials science. So there also tends to be a sort of, I don't want to use popularizing terms, but there are tipping points to these things where you know when a discipline is establishing itself as separate from its parent discipline.
Let me add something to this one, too. I'm going to be in deep trouble with my colleagues here, I'm afraid. I would rather if you have a question about it, send us a note, an email or whatever, allow us to get into a dialogue with enough information to dialogue about it. And if possible, I'd prefer that we be able to administratively recognize it, get it into the inventory, and not have a surprise later when it becomes controversial. I think we don't want any more work for these folks than we've already got. But the easiest way to avoid that is to not have a big problem later by handling it when it comes in early and trying to keep the documentation as modest as we can. Are we ready to adjourn? I guess we'll let Roger wrap it up.
All right. This shouldn't take long. Just to remind you how we started and why we're here, there's some new requirements about doctoral programs. Probably the one that's going to be the most impacting for those that are in the proposal stage involves the 5 annual reports. As we look at what you're doing compared to the proposal that you sent us and see how that's going along. Preliminary authority is a big deal now, and that needs to be attended to if you're even considering establishing a doctoral program. How long does it take to write a proposal? Well, it depends mostly on the campus timeline. By the time it gets here, I tried to give you a sense for a couple of months for it to get in the system, as long as nothing's wrong with it, and then waiting for the site visit and waiting for the coordinating board meeting to approve or disapprove it. So that's the kind of timeline we're talking about there. I sincerely appreciate everyone's attendance. Excellent questions. And I think we had a good first workshop. We'll try to do this again. I can't say when. Have a safe trip back to where you're going. Bye-bye.
Feel free to contact us.